Europe is on the brink of disaster. Economic crises, political instability, and rising social unrest are pushing some nations toward collapse faster than ever. Debt is skyrocketing, inflation is hitting record highs, and governments are struggling to maintain control. In France, protests have tripled in intensity over the past 5 years. Germany's once powerful economy is shrinking for the first time in decades. Meanwhile, nations like Moldova and Bosnia are at risk of complete political breakdown. Could this be the start of a major European collapse? Stay tuned as we reveal 10 European countries on the verge of disaster by 2025. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest global crises. Let's dive in. Number 10. France. France, a nation known for its resilience and strong economy, is now facing mounting challenges that could push it toward deeper instability. Social unrest has intensified in recent years, with mass protests becoming a defining feature of French politics. The Yellow Vest movement, which began in 2018, was a symptom of deeper frustrations with economic inequality and government policies. Since then, waves of strikes and demonstrations, particularly against pension reforms and labor laws, have paralyzed cities and fueled public discontent. The government's attempts to push through controversial policies have only widened the gap between the ruling elite and the working class. Economic stagnation is another looming crisis, with growth struggling to regain momentum after the pandemic. Public debt has soared past 110% of GDP, raising alarms about fiscal sustainability. Unemployment, especially among the youth, remains stubbornly high, leaving an entire generation with limited job prospects. Meanwhile, businesses are feeling the strain of higher taxes and rising production costs, pushing many to relocate operations abroad. At the same time, France's once thriving automotive and aerospace industries are losing ground to global competition. Environmental policies and carbon regulations, while necessary, have added pressure on these sectors, leading to job losses and industrial decline. Beyond economics, immigration and integration challenges continue to divide French society. Tensions over migration policies have fueled political polarization, with far-right parties gaining traction as they capitalize on public fears. The country's political landscape is becoming increasingly fragmented, making effective governance more difficult. Without strong leadership and bipartisan cooperation, France risks further economic downturns and worsening social fractures. Though the nation remains one of Europe's strongest powers, rising debt, deepening inequality, and ongoing protests pose serious threats to its stability. If these challenges are not addressed, France could be on a path toward prolonged economic and political turmoil by 2025. Number 9. Germany. Germany, Europe's largest economy and political powerhouse, is now under increasing pressure as it faces a combination of economic, demographic, and political challenges. The country's energy crisis has become a major source of concern, largely due to its decision to phase out nuclear power and reduce reliance on coal. This shift left Germany heavily dependent on imported natural gas, particularly from Russia, making it vulnerable to supply disruptions following the Ukraine conflict. As energy prices surged, industries, especially manufacturing, chemicals, and automotive sectors, began struggling to stay competitive. Many factories have had to cut production or relocate to countries with lower energy costs, weakening Germany's industrial dominance. At the same time, Germany's aging population is creating significant economic and social strains. With one of the lowest birth rates in Europe, the country faces a shrinking workforce, putting pressure on pensions, health care, and public services. Efforts to fill labor shortages with migration have faced resistance, further complicating the demographic challenge. The healthcare and engineering sectors, in particular, are experiencing severe worker shortages, threatening long-term economic stability. Meanwhile, political instability is growing as coalition governments struggle to maintain unity and implement effective policies. The Alternative for Germany, AfD, a far-right party, has gained significant support, tapping into voter frustrations over immigration, economic decline, and energy costs. This has fueled divisions within the country, making governance more complex and increasing uncertainty about Germany's future direction. Public dissatisfaction is rising as many Germans feel the government is failing to address pressing issues, leading to mass protests. Germany, once seen as an anchor of stability in Europe, is now at a crossroads, facing economic decline and political turbulence. While it remains one of the strongest economies globally, its energy crisis, labor shortages, and political fragmentation pose serious risks. Without decisive action, Germany could experience a prolonged period of economic stagnation and social unrest by 2025. Number 8. Spain. Spain, a country rich in history and culture, is now facing a series of deep-rooted challenges that could threaten its stability in the coming years. One of the most pressing issues is regional separatism, particularly in Catalonia and the Basque Country, where independence movements continue to undermine national unity. The Catalan independence referendum in 2017 marked a turning point, and tensions between regional leaders and the central government have not subsided. Madrid's refusal to grant more autonomy has fueled resentment, while nationalist sentiments remain strong, leading to periodic protests and political gridlock. At the same time, Spain's economy is struggling with slow growth, high debt, and persistent unemployment, especially among young people. With youth unemployment exceeding 30%, many young Spaniards have lost hope in the job market, leading to an exodus of skilled workers. This brain drain has weakened key industries, making long-term economic recovery even more difficult. Tourism, a major pillar of Spain's economy, has been volatile as pandemics, climate change, and geopolitical tensions disrupt global travel. Spain's debt problem is another growing concern as the government continues to run large budget deficits, limiting its ability to invest in critical infrastructure and social programs. Meanwhile, climate change is becoming an increasingly serious threat, with rising temperatures and worsening droughts affecting agriculture. Desertification is expanding in regions like Andalusia, putting pressure on water supplies and reducing crop yields. Major cities like Madrid and Barcelona are also experiencing extreme heat waves, leading to health risks and higher energy demands. Social unrest is another factor to consider, as frustration over economic inequality, political corruption, and austerity measures continues to grow. Mass protests have erupted in response to labor reforms and cost of living increases, putting additional strain on an already fragile political system. Without significant reforms, Spain risks prolonged economic stagnation, worsening regional conflicts, and a deeper political crisis by 2025. Number 7. Poland. Poland, once hailed as one of Europe's post-communist success stories, is now facing growing political and economic challenges that threaten its stability. The country has become increasingly polarized, with deep divisions between the ruling Law and Justice Party, PIS, and the opposition. Critics accuse the government of eroding democracy, weakening judicial independence, and limiting press freedom, leading to clashes with the European Union. As Poland's government pushes forward with controversial policies, tensions with Brussels have intensified, putting billions of euros in EU funding at risk. Without this crucial financial support, Poland could face a slowdown in infrastructure development, rising debt, and declining investor confidence. Meanwhile, economic pressures are mounting, with rising inflation and labor shortages putting stress on businesses and households. Poland has been one of Europe's fastest-growing economies, but the cost of living crisis and wage stagnation have led to increasing dissatisfaction. The country is also struggling to keep up with EU climate policies, which could lead to further restrictions on funding and investment. Geopolitical tensions add another layer of risk, as Poland remains one of NATO's key frontline states against potential Russian aggression. Its strong anti-Russian stance has made it a target for hybrid threats, including cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns aimed at destabilizing the country. At the same time, Poland has committed billions to military spending, expanding its armed forces and purchasing advanced weaponry from the U.S. and South Korea. While this strengthens national defense, it also strains public finances, diverting resources from essential services like healthcare and education. Public protests have grown more frequent, with demonstrations against judicial reforms, abortion bans, and government corruption drawing large crowds. Despite its economic strength, Poland risks political gridlock, economic instability, and rising unrest if these issues are not addressed. If tensions with the EU continue and domestic polarization deepens, Poland could face a prolonged period of uncertainty and social upheaval by 2025. Number 6. Serbia. Serbia, a country at the crossroads of Europe and the Balkans, is facing growing instability as political tensions, economic struggles, and ethnic divisions deepen. Under the leadership of President Aleksandar Vučić, Serbia has drifted toward authoritarianism, raising concerns about democracy and press freedom. Critics accuse Vučić of consolidating power, suppressing opposition voices, and using state-controlled media to maintain his grip on the country. This has led to mass protests, with citizens demanding greater political transparency, judicial independence, and protection of democratic institutions. Meanwhile, corruption remains a major problem, with many public resources mismanaged or funneled into the hands of political elites. Foreign investment, particularly from Russia and China, has provided short-term economic relief, but these deals often come with unfavorable terms for Serbia. The economy remains fragile, with high unemployment, low wages, and a declining industrial sector limiting opportunities for many Serbians. Many young professionals are leaving the country in search of better opportunities abroad, contributing to a worsening brain drain crisis. At the same time, ethnic tensions with Kosovo continue to escalate, threatening regional stability. The unresolved dispute over Kosovo's sovereignty has kept Serbia at odds with NATO, the EU, and neighboring countries, complicating its path to European integration. Nationalist rhetoric from Belgrade has fueled unrest in border regions, increasing fears of renewed conflict in the Balkans. Meanwhile, Serbia's reliance on Russian energy and close ties with Moscow have placed it in a difficult geopolitical position, especially amid rising Western sanctions against Russia. The government's balancing act between East and West has strained its relationship with the European Union, delaying potential EU accession. Without major political and economic reforms, Serbia risks falling deeper into authoritarian rule, economic stagnation, and ethnic conflict. By 2025, the country could face worsening civil unrest, further isolation from the EU, and increasing tensions in the Balkans if these issues are not addressed. Number 5. Hungary. Hungary, once seen as a promising post-communist democracy, is now facing mounting economic and political crises that could push it toward further instability. Under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, the country has moved toward authoritarianism, with growing restrictions on press freedom, judicial independence, and political opposition. Orbán's government has clashed repeatedly with the European Union, leading to financial penalties and the suspension of billions in EU funding due to concerns over corruption and democratic backsliding. Without these crucial funds, Hungary's economy has become increasingly vulnerable, struggling with inflation, declining foreign investment, and slowing growth. Major industries, particularly the automotive sector, have seen reduced investment from German manufacturers, weakening Hungary's export-driven economy. At the same time, rising living costs and stagnant wages have fueled public frustration, leading to protests against government policies and economic mismanagement. Meanwhile, Hungary faces a demographic crisis, with one of the lowest birth rates in Europe and a shrinking workforce putting pressure on pensions and public services. The government has attempted to counter this with family incentives and tax benefits, but these policies have had limited success in reversing population decline. Social divisions are deepening, with many Hungarians feeling disconnected from a government that prioritizes political control over economic reform. Additionally, Hungary's close ties with Russia have strained its relationships with Western allies, making its position within the EU and NATO increasingly uncertain. As Orbán continues to pursue a nationalist and isolationist agenda, Hungary risks becoming more economically and politically isolated from Europe. Growing public unrest, combined with weakening financial stability and authoritarian policies, could push Hungary toward an even deeper crisis by 2025. If the government fails to secure EU funding, improve economic conditions, and restore public trust, Hungary could face worsening protests, financial struggles, and further political isolation in the near future. Number 4. Italy. Italy, one of Europe's largest economies, is facing a perfect storm of political instability, economic stagnation, and rising debt that could push it toward a crisis in the coming years. The country has long struggled with government instability, having gone through more than 70 different governments since World War II. Coalition governments frequently collapse, leaving Italy with weak leadership that struggles to pass critical reforms. This political dysfunction has contributed to slow economic growth, with businesses hesitant to invest in a system plagued by uncertainty. At the heart of Italy's economic troubles is its massive public debt, which now exceeds 145% of GDP, one of the highest levels in Europe. Efforts to reduce the debt burden have been met with resistance, as austerity measures often trigger public backlash and protests. Meanwhile, Italy's banking sector remains fragile, with non-performing loans and struggling financial institutions threatening long-term stability. Unemployment, particularly among young people, remains a serious issue, pushing many skilled workers to leave for better opportunities abroad. The divide between the wealthier industrial North and the poorer South continues to widen, fueling resentment and calls for greater regional autonomy. As a key entry point for migrants crossing the Mediterranean, Italy faces ongoing challenges related to immigration and border control. The influx of asylum seekers has put strain on public services, housing, and local economies, leading to social tensions and political divisions. Far-right and populist parties have capitalized on these frustrations, gaining significant support by promising stricter immigration policies and economic reforms. If Italy fails to stabilize its political landscape, strengthen its financial system, and address social divisions, the country could face a major crisis by 2025. Without decisive action, Italy risks further economic decline, deepening political chaos, and growing public unrest in the years ahead. Number 3. Greece. Greece, a country that has endured a decade of financial crises, continues to struggle with massive debt, slow economic recovery, and political instability that could push it toward another collapse. Despite multiple EU bailouts, Greece's public debt remains among the highest in Europe, exceeding 200% of GDP, raising serious concerns about long-term sustainability. Austerity measures imposed during the financial crisis have left deep scars on the economy, with high unemployment, low wages, and underfunded public services still affecting millions of citizens. While tourism has been a lifeline for the economy, it remains highly volatile, making Greece vulnerable to global downturns and external shocks. Meanwhile, Greece's banking sector is still weak, struggling with bad loans and a lack of confidence from investors, which limits access to credit for businesses and individuals. At the same time, political instability remains a persistent issue, with frequent elections, coalition disputes, and growing dissatisfaction with the government. Populist movements on both the left and right have exploited public frustration, leading to a more fragmented political landscape and difficulty in passing critical reforms. Greece is also at the front line of the European migration crisis, with thousands of refugees arriving each year, overwhelming its asylum system and straining public resources. Local communities have expressed frustration over rising crime, lack of housing, and economic pressures, fueling social unrest and tensions between citizens and migrants. As climate change intensifies, Greece faces additional threats from wildfires, droughts, and extreme heat, impacting agriculture, infrastructure, and overall living conditions. Without major economic reforms, foreign investment, and improved governance, Greece could enter another period of severe economic instability. By 2025, the country risks further economic decline, worsening social tensions and increasing public unrest, potentially leading to another financial crisis. Number 2. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the most politically fragile nations in Europe, is facing deep ethnic divisions, economic stagnation, and rising secessionist threats that could push it toward collapse. The country remains deeply divided along ethnic lines, a legacy of the 1992 to 1995 Bosnian War, which ended with the Dayton Agreement, a treaty that created an overly complex and dysfunctional political system. Bosnia is split into two autonomous regions: the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, mostly Bosniaks and Croats, and Republika Srpska, mostly Serbs, each with its own government, creating endless political deadlocks. Ethnic leaders often prioritize nationalist rhetoric over economic and political progress, making effective governance nearly impossible. Republika Srpska's leader, Milorad Dodik, has repeatedly threatened secession, raising fears that the country could break apart, which could spark new regional conflicts. At the same time, corruption is rampant, with public funds frequently mismanaged, limiting economic growth and investment opportunities. Bosnia's unemployment rate remains one of the highest in Europe, driving thousands of young people to emigrate in search of better opportunities abroad. This mass brain drain is weakening the country's long-term economic prospects, leaving behind an aging workforce and a struggling public sector. Bosnia has also failed to meet the necessary reforms for European Union membership, leaving it politically and economically isolated. Meanwhile, ethnic tensions and weak institutions have led to increasing dissatisfaction among citizens, sparking protests and further instability. Foreign influence, particularly from Russia and Turkey, has added another layer of complexity as external powers seek to expand their influence in the Balkans. Without urgent political reforms, stronger economic policies, and conflict resolution efforts, Bosnia risks internal collapse, renewed ethnic conflict, and further isolation from the West. By 2025, Bosnia and Herzegovina could face a breaking point, with rising unrest and potential territorial fragmentation threatening its future. Number 1. Moldova. Moldova, one of Europe's poorest nations, is facing severe political instability, economic fragility, and geopolitical tensions that could push it toward collapse by 2025. The country has been plagued by frequent government collapses, corruption scandals, and weak institutions, making long-term stability nearly impossible. Political divisions between pro-European and pro-Russian factions have deepened, preventing Moldova from implementing consistent policies or securing strong international partnerships. Meanwhile, Moldova's economy remains highly vulnerable, heavily reliant on remittances from Moldovans working abroad, which account for over 25% of GDP. The country's industrial and agricultural sectors struggle due to outdated infrastructure, weak investment, and limited access to international markets. As energy prices continue to rise, Moldova finds itself in an even more precarious position, heavily dependent on Russian gas, making it vulnerable to Moscow's political leverage. The unresolved Transnistria conflict adds further instability, as the Russia-backed breakaway region remains a security threat and an obstacle to Moldova's EU aspirations. Tensions have escalated in recent years, with growing fears that Russia could use Transnistria as a staging ground for military action, similar to its tactics in Ukraine. At the same time, mass emigration is hollowing out Moldova's workforce, leaving the country with an aging population and worsening labor shortages. Public discontent is rising, with frequent protests over corruption, poverty, and government inefficiency, further destabilizing the country's fragile democracy. Although Moldova has made efforts to strengthen ties with the European Union, political gridlock and Russian influence continue to slow its progress. Without urgent reforms and stronger international support, Moldova risks economic collapse, political instability, and potential territorial disputes in the near future. By 2025, Moldova could be at a critical breaking point, facing deeper financial struggles, worsening security risks, and growing uncertainty over its future. And that's the reality Europe is facing right now. Economic turmoil, political chaos, and deepening social unrest are pushing these nations closer to the edge. Some may find a way to recover, but others could face an irreversible decline by 2025. What do you think? Which country is most at risk? Do you believe any of them can turn things around? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on the world's biggest unfolding crisis. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.